Let's get the links. There we go. All right, we are live on the Chasing Perfection pregame show. Final Four. UConn made it to its 13th consecutive Final Four, playing Arizona tonight at 9:30 ESPN. A lot to get into, but first, we have to talk about the first national semifinal game because that was – I still don't really believe what I watched. So if you didn't see it for some reason, Stanford was up by 1 with – I think it was like 10 seconds left or something.
Right about
and they inbounded it right around midcourt. Cameron Brink lost her balance. Maybe there was a foul. They didn't call it. South Carolina gets the steal, comes down, misses its first layup. Aaliyah Boston has a putback chance at the buzzer, and she can't make it. So Stanford advances to the national championship game. They will play the winner of UConn and Arizona. That was just an unbelievable ending.
Yeah, I mean, for them to, South Carolina even to come away with the steal on that last position there, but I really thought that putback from Boston was going to go in. She had such a clean look, almost kind of really got a good shot off there, but it just doesn't fall, and heartbreaker for South Carolina. But Stanford moves on.
Right, felt very similar to the end of regulation against UConn there. Obviously, South Carolina had more chances at the end. But almost immediately when it happened and that ball bounced out, the first thought in my mind was, oh my God, they did it again. They missed at the buzzer again. So interesting to imagine how much different South Carolina's season looks if both those shots go in. But that's the way it goes sometimes. So to move on, obviously, to UConn, Arizona. Very interesting matchup tonight for the Huskies. I think Gino put it in an interesting way in his pregame press conference, where Baylor is the toughest defensive team that they face this season, but Arizona is probably number 2, and for a completely different reason. And I think the number one thing that you have to talk about when you talk about Arizona is Ari McDonald, their star senior guard.
Yeah, I mean, she's just fantastic on both ends of the floor, but particularly on the defensive end. She was Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year twice. She's been a finalist for National Defensive Player of the Year twice. Just a really, really solid defensive player, and kind of sets the tone for all of Arizona's offense. Like Oriana said, it's, they're a really strong defensive team, but in a completely different way than Baylor is, because Baylor, so much of it is about their size and their length, and Arizona doesn't have either of those things, but they have the speed and the pressure and their full court press, and are really a strong defensive team through that instead.
Right. I think Gino also said she's the most dominant guard they faced this year, which is pretty impressive considering they're 2 games away from playing Caitlin Clark. But I think it does make sense with what he said in that obviously Clark is a great offensive player, phenomenal. But not only is McDonald arguably just as good on the offensive end, she's also phenomenal on the defensive end. And even though she's only 5'6", she really makes up for that lack of height in her quickness, her just quick twitch ability, the way that she's so fast, so hard to cover, so hard to shake on the defensive end. I think I'm really interested to see how UConn handles her and just how much they can try and limit what she does on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, exactly. And you're also looking at a 5th-year senior with Ari McDonald, right? Like Caitlin Clark, as good as she's been for a freshman, and she's been one of the best players in the country as a freshman, Ari McDonald's a 5th-year senior. She has that experience. She's going to be a top 5 probably pick in the WNBA draft this season. And what she does on the defensive end is so big, but then on the offensive end, she's just such a huge part of Arizona's offense. She scored 30 points in both of their last 2 games to get them here to the Final Four. Actually, I think there's only one other player that's even hit double figures in those 2 games for Arizona. So she's really put this team on her back to get them to the Final Four. She can really score it from all over. She's been fantastic from 3 in those last 2 games, but can also drive in the lane. She's just so quick, too. I think that's the biggest thing with her game, especially if UConn lets her get out in transition. She's just going to be down the floor before anyone has time to catch her.
Right. I think UConn is the heavy favorite in this game. They should be the heavy favorite in this game, but you can definitely see a path to an upset for Arizona in this game. And it basically all starts with Ari McDonald, because she's one of those players that can just go off the way we saw with Chelsea Dungy against Arkansas. And obviously much different UConn team since that Arkansas game, which we wrote about this week. But still, if UConn for some reason can't contain her, or McDonald just catches fire and can't miss, UConn, that's a path to trouble for UConn. I don't know if that alone could give Arizona the upset, but if UConn can at least slow McDonald down, keep her probably between 20 and 25 points, I think they'll come away with this win pretty easily.
Yeah, I agree. I think if they hold her around that 20-point mark, they're going to be in really, really good shape. Like I said, there just haven't been other players in Arizona that really step up and score a lot of points. And you know that UConn's going to go out there and score a decent amount. So for Arizona to keep pace, I think with UConn on the offensive end, even against a strong defense in Arizona, I think is going to be tricky, especially because UConn has the clear size advantage in the paint. And I think that's just going to bode well for them. Not only getting the ball inside to Olivia and Aaliyah on kind of the first shot attempts, but the two of them are going to have a huge advantage on the offensive glass.
Right. So obviously McDonald's the star. I think she's going to be UConn's main focus tonight. But just who are some other players on Arizona that people should keep an eye on tonight?
Yeah, so you've got a trio of players in their front court in Sam Thomas, Kate Reese, and Trinity Baptiste. Sam Thomas has been on this team for 4 years, senior, and then Baptiste and Reese are their two other leading scorers. Reese is their second leading scorer on the season, the only other scorer that averages double figures, but Trinity Baptiste has been pretty solid for them in the tournament as well. She scored 12 points. I think it was in that game over Indiana to put them into the Final Four. So those two are the ones they're going to be looking for to help Erin McDonald score points inside.
Right. Obviously there's those three, but I think pretty much the biggest thing when you look away from Ari McDonald with this Arizona team is that full court press defense that they bring. And it's going to be really interesting to see how UConn attacks that. And we'll get to her impact in a little bit, but Nika Muhl, the word is that she's officially playing tonight after suffering that high ankle sprain against High Point. I think that's a huge boost for UConn because they're going to have another ball handler out there on the floor. Gino even said that it gives them a chance to rest some of their guards for a few minutes when they have Nika because that's a fourth guard instead of really not having any depth on the bench. So I feel like UConn, for as much as any team that Arizona's probably faced this season, is not only well equipped to beat the press, but just absolutely tear it to shreds too.
Yeah, exactly. Because they have, even without Muhl, they've got three ball handlers on the court at all times. You added Nika Muhl, you could have a fourth handler on the floor, or you can rest someone and still have three on the floor. So that's going to be huge against that full court press. You're not going to have Aaliyah Edwards obviously bringing the ball up the floor against this, but they've got plenty of other options there. So they're going to be solid there. And I think Nika being in the lineup, even if she just plays limited minutes, also like Gino said on, I think it was Wednesday, gives them another defensive look that they can throw at Ari McDonald too. Obviously, Kristen Williams is going to be a huge part of that, but having Nika on the floor gives them another option there as well.
Just before lineups come in, so we have the ability to make this prediction, do you think she's going to be back in the starting lineup?
I actually think Edwards might start. We don't really have any information on how much Nika's actually going to be able to play tonight, but I could see Aaliyah Edwards getting a start and Nika coming in off the bench instead.
Yeah, I feel the same way. The only thing is maybe UConn just wants as many ball handlers out on the floor to start so that they can handle that press, because I feel like that's one of those things where if you break it 3 times in a row to start the game and don't turn the ball over, you're pretty confident going against it. But if you throw the ball away on the first possession and Arizona comes down and scores, your confidence is going to get hit pretty quickly. So even if she's only supposed to play maybe, let's just throw out a random number, 15 minutes tonight, I could see her playing like the entire first quarter and then maybe not playing a whole lot the rest of the game just to get UConn settled in. I do think it would also make sense to start Edwards just because of how well she's been playing. But at the same time, if you can start Muhl and then bring someone like Edwards off the bench against an Arizona team that really doesn't have that much size, that's really quickly going to wear Arizona down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is going to be a game, I think, for Aaliyah Edwards to thrive. I don't think they have anyone inside that's really going to be able to match her size and her physicality. So I think we are going to kind of see that Aaliyah Edwards that we saw in some of the earlier games in the tournament where she, puts up 18, 20 points just pretty much automatically from the floor. So I think we are probably in for another night like that from her.
I was just going to say, I feel like Aaliyah Edwards always scores 18 points when she has a great game. Never 17, never 19, never 25. For some reason, it always feels like it's 18. So I predict that Aaliyah Edwards is going to have exactly 18 tonight because that's just the way it's going. And if Aaliyah Edwards scores 18, UConn's not losing.
Yeah, exactly. I think with that, it's just like another weapon on top of what they already get from Paige Beckers and Kristen Williams and Avina Westbrook. So I don't think they're losing with her scoring 18 points too. And like I said, they just have such a size advantage inside and they're really going to be able to crash the glass. So even when, if the guards aren't making their shots from deep or whatever, I feel like Aaliyah Edwards or Olivia Nelson-Ododa is just going to be able to put those shots right back up in the basket.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing where UConn doesn't need to have a great shooting night tonight. Whereas if they get to Stanford in the national championship, they do need those shots to fall. But I feel like it's going to be one of those games where UConn not only can get a ton of offensive rebounds, but it could be one of those games where half their shots are layups just because they're getting it inside every single time. I think we've seen in a lot of these games, their early possessions almost always kind of feel like they go right to Olivia Nelson-Ododa to start off the game. They get it into the post, and it's almost like they test the waters down there where Liv will maybe try a move or two, doesn't necessarily force it to the basket, but if the chance is there, they're going to take it. And if they get that opportunity early, they're just going to keep feeding her inside, because if you're scoring every single basket in the paint, you don't need to be shooting three-pointers. Like, you're just going to be able to score at will every single time you come down. So I think we're going to see a return to that. Paige brings it up, or Avina brings it up, or Nika brings it up, and maybe they run a little bit of motion at the perimeter, but it's going to get into Olivia Nelson-Ododa, and these first few possessions are all going to go through her.
Yeah, I could very much see that being the game plan. It feels like more, Iowa and even Syracuse had like that stronger post presence where Arizona doesn't have it. So it's almost not that obviously Arizona's a much better team than High Point, but just their ability to feed inside is going to, I think, feel more like that game. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I agree. I think the first few runs on the offense are going to go through her inside, and it's probably going to continue that way because I don't think UConn's going to have too much trouble finishing inside with either her or Edwards. I think really the biggest key for UConn in this is just not to turn the ball over. If they can stop Arizona from getting out in transition, they probably aren't going to have very many issues in this game.
Yeah, and I think that was a big thing in the Baylor game too, where UConn started off so well, 16-4 in the first 5 minutes, and then they just started getting a little sloppy with the ball. And even though it was only 1 or 2 turnovers to start, that just gave Baylor the spark that they needed to get back in the game. So again, it's going to be those first few possessions against the press where if Arizona can get a couple steals, they're suddenly going to feel really, really good about themselves. And they're going to be flying around the court, and UConn's going to have 10 times more trouble with it. But if they can break it and their first 3 possessions all end up with wide open layups for Aaliyah Edwards under the basket, which is what happens, not necessarily Aaliyah Edwards, but so many times when teams try and press UConn, they just end up with a wide open basket. And it'll be interesting that if UConn beats it on a consistent basis, if maybe Arizona decides to go against it, or if similar to the Syracuse zone, they're just going to ride it to the death.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to see kind of how they change their looks as they kind of UConn goes inside and is able to break that press. But yeah, I think it's just going to be interesting to see also, though, the individual matchup between Paige Bueckers and Ari McDonald. I think, she had one of her toughest defensive matchups with Didi Richards guarding her in that Baylor game. And Ari McDonald is small, but she's going to be a really tough defensive matchup as well. So another thing to keep an eye on, I think in the Baylor game, we saw that kind of Kristen or Avina ran the offense a little bit more so that Paige had opportunity to move off the ball and get open. And so I'm interested to see if we see similar things like that today.
Yeah, I think I don't know if critical is the right word, but we've just spoken so much about Kristen and her game on the podcast this season and talked so much about her. And I think a lot of times we didn't necessarily believe that there was really a true turnaround coming for her, I guess. Like, she was finally breaking through to that next level in her game. But really, since that Iowa game, I think it's just been a completely different Kristen Williams. And honestly, for the first time in her career, I feel very confident that this is a level of play that she can sustain, because there's just a different look in her eye when she's at the top of her game, when she's on. And that look hasn't gone away I went away for a little bit against Baylor at times, but we've seen that look way more consistently than we have seen in the past. So I'm interested that you put Ari McDonald on Paige, but I almost feel like Kristen is just as dangerous as Paige when she's on her game. And if anything, is a stronger guard, is really, really good at getting to the rim. Not that Paige isn't, but Kristen is just so good on offense when she's at her absolute peak that I think it's probably going to be a more difficult decision for Arizona on who to put Ari McDonald on than it seems like on the surface.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially the way Kristen Williams has been playing these last couple games. I mean, it's a hard decision because either one can hurt you, I think, in so many different ways. And Paige could go off for 28, but just as easily Kristen Williams could go off for 28. So how you pick it, I think we will probably see McDonald on both of them at some point during the game.
They could both go off for 28.
Yeah.
You never know. I saw an interesting stat where I don't remember it specifically, but I think something like 3 of Arizona's 5 losses have been when they've given up more than 65 points. So Arizona really has trouble keeping up with teams that can score a lot. And I think obviously this is a UConn team that is pretty much dangerous, not just 1 through 5, 1 through 6, 1 through 7 with scoring the ball. So as long as they're not letting McDonald go off and basically go bucket for bucket with them, I could very easily see this be a game similar to Iowa where UConn is comfortably ahead for most of it. Iowa is always hanging around but can never really close the gap. I just don't really think Arizona has the firepower in this game.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest issue for them is just like UConn's going to come out and score more than 66 or whatever the number was points most likely. And because Aaron McDonald is just such a big part of their offense, they don't really have an answer from a different position to keep up with UConn. And I think, we talked about how Beckers could go off for 28, Williams could go off for 28, Aaliyah Edwards might put up 18. There's just so many weapons on this UConn team that it's going to be really difficult for Arizona to match that scoring production.
Yeah, so we do have the starting lineups. Aaliyah Edwards is going to stay in there, so not a huge surprise. I'm really interested, obviously, to see just what the rotation looks like because first, how many minutes Nika Muhl gets. I can't imagine she's going to be full go to get 30, 35 minutes like she would in a normal game. I think she's definitely going to be on a minutes limit, especially you can't be planning for the next game when you need to win this one first. But I think you do have to take an eye a little bit to that next game, especially if it's not a 1-2 possession game where UConn has a bit of a cushion. I think you have to think about her potential availability for Sunday, which with that, Anna Makarat didn't play at all against Baylor, which I guess in the grand scheme of things isn't a huge surprise. But tonight, with Nika Muhl on a minutes limit and going up against the press, she's just another ball handler and another really good distributor that you can have out there. So I think I'd be a little surprised if Makarat didn't get any minutes, maybe just to fill in if, let's say, Muhl plays 15, maybe to fill in that extra 10 minutes, that extra, I don't know if it would be more than 10 minutes, just a little bit extra to help replace Muhl's load, at least with the ball handling and the passing.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. I think we saw a lot of minutes from Aubrey against Baylor, which made sense in the terms of the type of team you're playing. But I think in this case, it probably actually makes more sense for Makarat to come in off the bench in that role because you've got that press. And as good as Aubrey is on the defensive end, she sometimes can turn over the ball a little bit, and that could be a problem up against this Arizona defense. So Makarat as a ball handler and someone that has that strong passing ability will probably be a more logical fit off the bench in this game.
Right, and against Baylor, UConn couldn't afford to not have 2 rebounders in the game because they were getting killed on the offensive glass as it was. So if it wasn't one of Olivia Nelson-Adota or Leah Edwards, it had to be Aubrey Griffin, which I think played a factor in it because you put Anna Makarat out there and you only have one of those 2 starting bigs. Baylor was just going to eat them alive, and they could let that happen. So with a smaller team, obviously Aubrey Griffin's probably going to get, I would guess she probably gets the 6 most minutes off the bench just because Muhl is going to be on a limit. But I think it's probably going to be a longer leash, a deeper rotation than we saw against Baylor.
I agree. I think we'll see, kind of Griffin, Muhl, and Makarat coming off the bench. And if UConn's able to, kind of build out a cushion early on too, we might even see some of the deeper part of the bench as well.
Okay, so let's get into some predictions for this game. First, UConn has a 90% chance to win, according to her hoop stats, similar to the Baylor game. That feels a little high. I think UConn should be pretty heavily favored, but it doesn't feel like this is an insurmountable task for Arizona. Arizona got to the Final Four regardless, and even though I feel like they did come through the weakest region and they haven't necessarily played a super tough slate like UConn has, I don't think it would quite be at that upset level of Mississippi State a few years back. I think it would definitely be a major upset, but it wouldn't be ground-shaking, end-of-the-world type upset.
Yeah.
So the predicted margin of victory from her hoop stats is 15 points. Do you like the over or the under?
I'm going to go with the over. I mean, so much of it comes down to how many points they're able to hold McDonald to, but I think either way, I kind of think that as long as UConn's able to get the ball inside, they're not going to have too much trouble with this game, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the margin end up around 20.
Okay, I'm going to throw a curveball at you two. How do you see this game going? Is it a game where UConn jumps out to a big lead early and kind of hangs on to that for the rest of the game? Is it like Iowa where it's a comfortable 10 points throughout the whole game and they pull away late? Is it just a slow burn? How do you see it going?
I kind of see them jumping out to the big lead early. As long as they're able to handle the press, they're going to be able to go inside. And Oli Edwards in that starting lineup, I think they get on the board pretty easily in the beginning and then just kind of hold on to it from there.
I've been flip-flopping on how I feel about this game. Pretty much, I'd say over the last day or two. I think UConn's going to win. I don't think that's the problem. But when this matchup first came out, when UConn beat Baylor, I felt like UConn was probably going to blow Arizona out, and it wasn't going to be that close. But as I've looked more at Arizona, Aari McDonald, just I don't know how to really feel about this. I'm not going to say that one part of my gut feels this way and the other feels this way. I think it's going to be somewhere right around that 15-point margin. I think it's going to be comfortable for UConn, but it's not going to be the point where we see Saylor Poffenbarger, Mir McLean, Piath Gabriel, Autumn Chasson, if she's healthy, get in the game. I don't think it's going to be that type of blowout. I don't think UConn's going to really be in any danger. I think maybe the first quarter will be close because it just kind of feels like that's the way the last few games have been going. So maybe like a 4-point game at the end of the first quarter. They get some distance by halftime, and then the second quarter they just kind of run away with it. I think one thing that might be a little overlooked that we haven't talked about, this is definitely a potential letdown game for UConn. And I think even though this is a young team, they've handled these pressure situations really well. When you look at Tennessee, even Arkansas to a certain degree, they at least hung in that one. South Carolina, Baylor, they've been in these big moments and they've handled themselves pretty well. But that was an emotional win over Baylor. That was an intense win over Baylor. They've had some time away from it since, but I know they're never going to say that they look differently on an opponent, but everybody knew that Baylor was going to be a battle. Everybody knew that Baylor was a really good team. I think maybe they could be looking at that 3 seed next to Arizona's name a little bit and maybe just don't come out with that same fire initially. So I don't think it's going to, again, result in an upset for UConn, but I could see maybe that first quarter being a little tough for UConn. They have some trouble beating the press, getting into a flow on offense, stopping McDonald. But yeah, I think eventually UConn's going to build a lead and it's going to end up pretty comfortably by the end.
Yeah, that's a good point about how, they came off this huge game against Baylor and now they're coming into this, which, yeah, it's the Final Four, so they understand the stage, but it does feel like the easier game, right? So I could see them maybe not coming out with their foot fully on the gas, but I think even if, the first quarter is close, they'll recognize what's going on pretty quickly and be able to pull out to a big lead by halftime.
Right. It would be one of those games where someone gets yanked very quickly if that happens, I think, especially when you have Nika Muhl sitting right on the bench.
Yeah.
Nika, that not only physical, tough defensive guard, but Gino's always credited her with bringing a ton of energy. And I think that could be, or even bringing Aubrey Griffin off the bench. They have a lot of options that they can mix and match out on the floor in this game if they do come out slow.
For sure.
Okay. Finally, give me one prediction in general for the game.
I think we're going to see another big game from Kristen Williams. So I'm going to say that Kristen Williams scores 20 points tonight.
I asked that question and hadn't decided what my prediction was yet. And I'm like, I might go something with Kristen Williams, but thank you. You ruined that for me. Okay, now I need a second to think about this. I think they hold McDonald under 20 points. McDonald is fantastic, but I really feel like more so than Iowa, who you mentioned before we went live, that at least Iowa had Sinano that they could go with. Whereas I don't really think Arizona has anyone else that they can go to if UConn's double teaming McDonald every time down the court. Maybe UConn puts out a full court press of their own, or they have used a half court trap a lot this season. So I'm feeling 15, 17 points for Aari McDonald. I think she still does some damage, but UConn's pretty much going to be on her the entire game. So I can't see her. I think UConn would. I don't know how to phrase this. I don't think UConn wants to lose the game, obviously, but I think they would rather have someone else beat them than McDonald, because when they talked about the Arkansas game, Avina Westbrook had a really interesting comment that they knew exactly what Arkansas's game plan was going to be going in. They knew exactly what they were going to try and do. They knew what their offense was going to look like, and UConn still couldn't do anything to stop them. So I think UConn has a pretty good idea of what Arizona is going to do in this game, unless Adia Barnes just tries to pull something out of a hat and give UConn a different look, which I don't think she will. So I don't think UConn wants that embarrassment of, we know it's going to be all Ari McDonald and she's still going to beat us. So I think they're basically going to throw the kitchen sink at her and say, all right, let one of your other players who haven't scored in double figures very much in this NCAA tournament beat us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair game plan, right? Like, you have all these players on the Arizona roster that only one has even averaged in double figures this season. So forcing everyone else to beat you is definitely a solid game plan here.
Absolutely. So 4 minutes to tip off. ESPN, UConn, Arizona. You can follow me on Twitter at Daniel V. Connolly for updates and gifts throughout the game. Megan, are you going to be on your Twitter or her stats tonight?
Just my own. So at Megan Gower on Twitter.
Yep. So that'll do it for us. Thanks for tuning into the Chasing Perfection pregame show. We'll know in about 2 hours if we have one more of these left in the season. Thanks for watching.